When I started this painting, it was originally because I started with just an empty frame. I was at one of the hobby stores, and they had a frame, and it was like dirt cheap, so I made a panel for it, and then I brought the sketch idea, and I started bringing this idea to kind of life. I thought it would be a good aspect of, being able to see the interior of a actual store and emporium and make it interesting. So I did the perspective myself, and I did this in Procreate, just doodling at night, and I kind of put the vagueness of ideas in there. I didn't really have kind of the things that I was originally going to put in there. I just kind of had a number of different things, and so I just wanted this generic store as I started. And I started putting some basic ideas in there, and you can see, like, I came across a random picture of a sloth, and then I started, just mocking up other things. I thought it'd be cool to have like some different stuff in there, and I put a little voodoo doll in a cage and all of this little stuff. That was my initial idea. And then as I started kind of going further with it, I started getting the idea of putting different stuff in there from like the 1980s and stuff like that. And so you can see I have everything on separate layers. My perspective isn't on a separate layer. My items are on separate layers. And so it was kind of easy to kind of build out things as I went. And this initial perspective, I just kept feeling wrong to me. Like, I just didn't like it. So I basically went into 3D and modeled, and then I took that image that I rendered from 3D and basically repositioned all the objects, and then kind of redrew the different things that I had originally drawn. And so that's the initial kind of phase for my line work when I started painting. And for the most part, it kept me just, I didn't want to put anything specific in there. I wanted very generic stuff to start off with. And as I continued to go further on, it would be, I started putting a little Easter eggs in there. At first it was, just like the Skeletor sword or Skeletor staff Havoc. And then it was, I put in some other things. And essentially what I did was I just kept going on with the process. I thought it was cool, so I put an alien skull and things like that in there. And some of the stuff was just kind of generic placeholders, and then other stuff was kind of specific, like the alien skull. And so as I painted this, I blocked out some base colors to make certain things pop out. And I originally had it to where it was one person in the kind of welcoming you to the emporium. And as I continued to work on it, I felt like the composition wasn't right. It was kind of lopsided, and it didn't work very well. And so I wound up trying to fix that during mid-composition. It just, sometimes as you're working at a piece, you have to figure out something's not working right, so you have to figure out what's going on with it. And so here my original artwork is projected, and it projected a little bit short, so that's fine. And normally I don't do a underpainting layer, but I felt like since the majority of everything was like wood beams and copper and things like that I wanted, I kept it. I figured the underpainting would be a very good start. And so that's kind of the first process. Was once it was drawn in, I just basically went through and kind of worked on kind of pushing in the lighting. Now at this point I'm using a very light sepia, burnt sienna type of thing, and I'm just watering it down with 511 and going from one process to another. My base layers, my base colors. And one of the biggest things on doing a big painting like this, where you've got a ton of things in there, is ultimately don't worry about the lighting at this point. I felt like I could, if I got the things in there, the lighting, I could always kind of paint in the shadows later. And so you'll see me working on different things, from adding in, kind of popping out the main character, and I wanted that to be the main character. I wanted that to be the focal point. So that's why I painted essentially the vest in red, and that made it pop out right away. And then from there, I added in this other figure, and that was my process of like, okay, these are the two figures that I'm going to have in there, but my primary figure is going to be my central focus, and then everything's going to be surrounding around that. Everything else, that's when I started to just block in the book frames and block in the shadows in the book frames. Not so much even the items, just the shadows themselves. And I use the kind of a burnt sienna sepia to just kind of darken some things in there. Added a little bit of white to mute it a little bit so it wasn't so dark in a lot of areas. And then I just built up the basic items. And I'm not too concerned with the textures or details. I just really am trying to get the form at this point. And so once I get these initial kind of ideas in there and these books in there, I'm just using multicolors, mainly sepias, and then I'm adding a little blue or a little red to add that in there. I'm also putting base tones of different pieces as well, so you'll see like I'm adding in, the grays for the glass, and I didn't want the cases in front to be really vibrant or a lot of stuff in there. I wanted those to kind of set back into the background. And so you'll see here I'm painting the skull for the Skeletor Havoc, and I'm just looking at a lot of reference. And when I'm doing this, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is I'm just finding one particular reference that I like online, and then I'm painting that in a day or two. And I pick 3 or 4 a day, and I'm just kind of doing it step by step. It was a process of doing one thing after another. And I think doing a lot of this stuff can get kind of overwhelming, and a lot of people are always ask me, well, how did you manage to work on this so long? And in all reality, I only did like 3 little pieces a day, which is about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And then what I would do is I would when I had enough of it, I would pick a little painting, a little 5x7 or a little 6x8, and then I would do a little painting like that, and that would give me a kind of a refresher from stepping away from doing all these little items. There's things to do actually with this was to come up with all the different ideas. I wound up asking a lot of different people what they thought some good ideas were. I kind of dived into some of my old movies and looked at what the old movies I had and things like that. So you'll see like the Indiana Jones that I'm working on now, as well as some of the other aspects like He-Man's sword or the Princess Bride sword or things like that. And so you'll see this keep going. One of the other struggles that I had was actually technical. When I use OBS to record the video, and I use a 4K to record, and with this I was struggling where if I'd forget to stop it every maybe 30 or 40 minutes, if I do like an hour and 15 minutes for a video, OBS would just kind of break the video. And so there's little portions of here that are kind of cut out. But you'll see that as I kind of work on this and kind of move back and forth, I'm usually doing this between every day or every other day. And you can see I'm watching TV in the background and doing things like that. So as I do this though, one of the big things that you'll see is just doing one item at a time. And I felt like that was a small section. And I got a chance to watch another artist do a large format city in the same kind of aspect. And that allowed me to kind of really see them doing smaller sections at a time and doing little pieces at a time, and kind of working one section at a time kind of makes it go forward. And so I wound up with like 40 hours of video, and so some of the video got a little bit lost. But as you can see, it's just kind of one-step process, and keep going and kind of go from one step to the next. And I put in a section of scrolls, and it was a lot of just little repetitious marks. There's a video, or there's a post that on muddy colors that I was looking at, and how you don't have to make every single detail. Another thing I was struggling with was the brush itself was just not small enough to kind of work in the tiny areas. So you'll see some places get kind of rough in some areas, and I'll have to go back over it because the brush is either starting to get old and splaying, and I just didn't realize what I was doing. And some I tried to put in more detail, like that's a Neverwinter book, or not Neverwinter, Never-Ending Story book, and the problem with it was just no matter how much I tried, I couldn't put in enough detail. And so that was a big struggle too. It's just kind of how much detail can you fit into such a small piece. And I always have a tendency to want to put more detail in, and I'm starting to realize that I need to plan better for that and put in a little bit more. Like this probably could have been twice the size, and I could have put in as much detail, if not more, and it would have looked great, I think, in my opinion. But I kind of committed to this size, and so I used a small brush, a 02, and just kind of dilly-dallied around from one spot to the next. And I feel like working on something like this, as you can see, like I even put Gizmo in there as like a stuffed animal. But working on stuff like this is, kind of cathartic, because you pick one thing every day and you work on that thing for the day. There's not really a sense of if I say there's not a sense of one thing after another. It's just kind of like build these items into this painting. And I can see how a painting will take, some of these artists several years or months to do. And I think in our day and age, with the technology as fast as it is, we're supposed to be posting all the time. We're supposed to be doing all this stuff all the time. And sometimes you do a piece that you just can't do that at. And so that's one of the biggest struggles in our world is the instant gratification. This piece took me probably about 2.5 months of consistent working on it. And in the meantime, I also did, plein air painting. I also went and did life drawing, and I also did even like little studies and stuff like that. And so you have to realize that this is where sometimes multiple pieces kind of work in. Now, this is a ruler I made. It's basically a square dowel with some wooden wheels at the end of it. And I use it as a maul stick. I don't like the big maul stick. I feel it's cumbersome, especially for my art space. Having a big stick just feels like it's always in the way. Whereas this little stick, I can put it on the dry painting. I can even put it on a wet painting because it's rounded and it won't make too many marks, or I won't have to fix too much. I even use it for plein air painting as well. And then, as I start doing this, one of the big things I was struggling with too was the simple fact that I didn't want, I wanted my main focal color to be that red vest, and so I did not want any other color to pull further than that. And so a lot of this was really pushing back some of the tones and muting some of the colors, so that red vest and that character in the center, off center, was my main kind of character. And so you can see here, I'm just going back for a second pass at this point. I'm going through and adding in more details to the figures, and I'm kind of touching up little spots here and there. And I feel that's kind of the process of kind of building out this character. And you can see some things get lost, like my vulture got lost in it. whether it was a little smudging or a little bit of paint over it. The vulture got lost, so I had to pull that back out. And I wanted this as my light source. I wanted like a magical kind of fish as my light source. And so once I painted that in there, I lined it all out. But then the issue was the lines were too consistent for being a light source. And so I had to actually go back in and paint over it again several other times. So sometimes that just happens where something doesn't work right and you have to keep forcing, or you keep doing it over and over and over. And you can see here I'm just kind of blocking in the darker colors. I'm using a Payne's Gray and a little bit of ultramarine, and I'm actually just painting it in and wiping it in to kind of push in that light source or the shadows of my environment. So that's giving my countertops depth as I start pushing and pulling that things back and forth. And so this is close to getting to the final part, and a lot of it was just basically I felt like the books themselves needed a little bit more dimension, and it was kind of flat behind them, so I added in a little bit more shadows there. And I felt the countertops needed to be a little bit more kind of some things that needed to be cluttered a little bit more, so I added some random stuff kind of there. And so like you can see, that was the process of kind of going through this. So I hope that you enjoy this. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, or if you want to see a certain tutorial, let me know. And I hope you all have a great day.